right, so welcome everyone to our Marquez community meeting. And today's a pretty interesting agenda. We're gonna talk about the recent Marquez release. So we released 0.12 last week. And then we're also gonna talk a little bit about the lineage API. So with the 0.12 release, we have an ingestion API for lineage in the open lineage spec. But now I think a lot of the questions are, well, how do you start querying the lineage that's stored in the Marquez database? So Danny's going to kind of talk more at a high level on ways that we've been thinking about exposing an API. And then from there we'll kind of leave it open for questions and just some general chat about the Marquez project in general. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen and we're going to go. We're going to go to the release that we did. So I'm going to go over some of the features that went in. In the 0.12 release, we had the modules. So this was something that we've been working on and combining all the different repos into that we have around Airflow, the clients, and some of the integrations, and combining them into the project. So here, if I click on API, you'll see that the Marquez API is now an API submodule. And the same thing for the integrations as well. With the recent release of 0.12, we also have Spark and Airflow as well. So we promoted the Spark integration to 0.12. So if you want, it's not a normal use case, but it's now available on Maven. So if you want to pull down and just experiment a little bit with it, you could do that. And there's some getting started guides. If you want to start using it with Dataproc, it's still early. We're working on improving the configuration component to get it to use it with your Dataproc PySpark operator. But if you wanted to go through that and just give us some feedback, that'd be great. So that also was part of the release. And of course, you have there were some bug fixes, and we have a working example of Airflow. But I think what we're going to be doing is, updating the story around that. So really providing a, more clear example of how you could get started with Marquez and Airflow. So there's some addition that there's actually a work in progress PR that I've been working on to improve the example, but make the example a bit more concrete. There's some things that we optimize around the tables, but I think the most interesting part is just the open lineage API that's now available. So if you go to our see, actually, we do. I don't think we may have not updated the open API spec for Marquez. That's a good, yeah. Okay, we didn't do that. Okay, that's something we could easily backfill.
You want to go to the repo to show the YAML file, maybe?
The YAML file. Oh, the open API spec in general. Yeah, we could do that. Though I don't think. Do you remember, Danny, if you updated the open lineage? Added the lineage endpoint in the open API spec.
It's not merged yet, is it?
There was things around facets.
Oh yeah.
But I think the lineage endpoint in general.
No, I don't think I added the lineage endpoint to that.
Okay, that's okay. We can open up an issue to backfill that. But moving on from that, so there's a lineage component where you could start collecting, and we're going to talk about how you can start reading the lineage or start querying the lineage graph in this meeting. And then the two other things that that was part of the release is just the GraphQL endpoint, Spark, and then you can now list versions of data sets. So this one is now part of the open API spec. So if you wanted to retrieve a version of a data set, you'll be able to do that. So here, the endpoint, you have data sets, and then you can have the version, and then you could specify a particular version, and you get back, in this case, now you get back a version, UUID, as well as that was just like the current state of the data set when it was first created or it was modified. And I think the more exciting thing is that with job runs create new data set versions. So a lot of time they do modify the data set. You now get a created by run. So you get a field that's populated, and you know which run touched that data set. So that's also part of the spec. And you're also able to list data sets. So that's a key thing here. Let's see. Yeah. So you're also able to list data sets or the versions for the data set. This is also interesting, and it should be versions. So although there's a slight mismatch here, it should be versions here. So that's interesting. Okay. A bit of the docs are out of sync, but we'll make sure we improve that. Oh, actually. Okay, I'm sorry. I was just the way it was. It was just kind of odd. So here I was clicking on the wrong one. So here you could list versions, and this is what I was expecting. Okay, I was just zoomed in. Yeah. So here you have the versions. So the top level will be versions, and inside there you'll have all the different versions for a data set. So it's also available. So that made it into the 0.12 release. Okay. So anyone have a question on that in terms of the release or any part of the features that made it in? Also happy to demo any, like if we wanted to demo the versions and listing data set versions, we could do that. If not, we can kind of hand it over to Danny. He could talk a little bit about more the forward thinking that we're doing when it comes to the lineage API.
I do have one question, if this is the right time to ask it, but in terms of the Spark integration, I saw that there was a data proc sort of readme. I'm assuming that's directly with the data proc API. For the Spark integration, are there any limitations on like Spark versions or PySpark versus Scala Spark that like right now in the 0.12 to be aware of if I was to start playing around with that?
Yeah, sure. I can pipe in here. Yeah, so currently it's set up to be a single version of Spark. Like it is very dependent on the Spark version. There will be class loading issues if you try to use different Spark versions. We're plugging a lot into the Spark API, and we like plan on doing like setting more versions. So it's a little bit more useful and like, making it a little bit more generic. Like we had a major need for this one particular version. And it's pretty easy to port. It's just like there's a lot of class incompatibilities because of the Scala integration behind the scenes. And so like there's JVM versions, like you have to build it on a specific, JDK version. And it's just like, there's a lot of like, build related issues to that. So like you can, like if you wanted to build it for your own specific Spark version and your own specific Scala version that you're targeting, you can just pretty much go in and just change the dependencies and rebuild it and be able to get that kind of thing. Like we just haven't yet invested in the build pipeline to start targeting just like a matrix of major Spark versions.
Mm-hmm. And that's a good question too about compatibility. We do see the same concerns for the Airflow library that we have. So we're looking at introducing some matrix that allows us to test different versions of Airflow, the Airflow library. So when we have the Marquez integration with Airflow, we build on top of the library, and we've seen some mismatch between Airflow versions that do break it. So we want to take a similar route with Spark, where we begin to have this matrix and say, okay, let me test these versions of Spark and confirm that, they are compatible. But right now, like Danny was saying, we kind of pinned it on 2.4.7 here.
Just out of curiosity, Danny, how perilous is it when one wades away from that Spark version? Like, is 2.4.4 or something in your experience? It's like, whoa, you're likely, or is it like major version?
Well, what will likely happen is that it'll fail to load when you add it as the instrumentation, and so you have a pretty early indicator on whether or not it will work or not. But it is a little perilous. They change things that like it's never meant to really like add instrumentation directly to the classes like that. And like there are workarounds to be able to like target a lot of different Spark versions by just using a little bit more reflection access, because like what we're doing isn't like crazy. Like it's a pretty standard way of extracting Spark metadata. But like if you have a particular Spark version that you're trying to target, be sure to like open a PR and let us know, and we can add a little bit, devote a little bit of extra time, because we already have the sort of testing infrastructure set up. This is still a very like early work in progress, right? So your feedback would really help shape the conversation.
Okay, cool. And still, there's always the option of just straight up using the Java client directly, as I guess as a fallback, right?
The Java client, you also have to, it's compiled on JDK 11. And so there can be class loading issues with those specific versions of Scala. We sort of have a client forked inside the Spark client there that we're going to break out into an open lineage client that is Java 1.8 compatible, Java 8 compatible.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Right. Great question, Ryan. So I think, 1 second here. So I could stop sharing. There we go. So now we can move on to discussion around querying the lineage that's stored in the Marquez backend. Yeah, Danny, if you wanted to kind of talk a little bit about that and what we've been talking about behind the scenes, and maybe where we want to take the API.
Sure. So to sort of like recap what lineage is we're trying to get a current view of our data ecosystem and our job ecosystem. So when we look at a particular data set, we want to know which jobs produce that data set and which jobs consume that data set currently, right? Or, what is the latest job that produced, data set X. And so we're providing an API to be able to pull out all of that information and present it as like a REST API. So you can, it's more of like a programmatic access to it. And we can talk a little bit more about that. I also want to note that like you can pull out lineage information currently through the GraphQL endpoint. We do have links to what the current data sets are and the current jobs in order to be able to, manually recurse through the database and pull out very specific examples. However, if you wanted to know like what your data ecosystem is around a particular node, like a job or a data set, and you want a like arbitrary depth of like, give me everything 10 hops away from that particular data set, because I'm trying to do like a root cause analysis workflow to try to determine something. This API is a little bit more in tune for that. So what the API would return is a flattened set of nodes. So just a single list of nodes with the edges to what the data sets or jobs that they point to get like all of the current, to get the current ecosystem. It's in hopes that we're going to then integrate this into our UI to provide just a very easy and no nonsense way to view lineage and to be able to get, do a root cause analysis quickly. If I have something I could show off what the lineage endpoint would look like, but there are plans to add this into the REST endpoint as well as the GraphQL endpoint to be able to quickly get that. And there's a notion of paging that we're trying to do of, like as I have 10 like a depth of 10 to see the 10 nodes that I'm trying to like recurse out to be able to like page over them and to be able to like fully reconstruct your API graph or your lineage graph, your data graph, without having to, return a massive result set if you have a very large data ecosystem.
Yeah, and the current mechanism that we have, so in the Marquez UI, we actually traverse, we kind of list the namespace and traverse the jobs and traverse the data sets and link them up that way. So the idea is push that to the back end, because that's, as graphs grow, that's going to be not an efficient model to use, just that general traversal. And also refreshing it also is pretty expensive, what we saw. So Peter's going to be pretty excited about a new API that just returns everything that we need in order to display the lineage graph. And especially as you click on nodes and you expand them, and you want to kind of, instead of doing 20 hops, you want to go 20 hops in another direction. So there's going to be a lot more flexibility on just observing upstream and downstream dependencies. So yeah, just wanted to mention that.
I'm just curious. The Marquez is still primarily backed by Postgres, right?
Yeah.
With this sort of graph-esque traversal, are there any thoughts around changing that, or is Postgres looking to be like the primary data store for Marquez for the foreseeable future?
It is Postgres for the foreseeable future. Like we have built a prototype in the past of doing using a graph database store at the back end, but we feel like it would be a little bit too much to ask the open source community to support a second database to do this. So luckily, this traversal is very easy. It's just doing a breadth first traversal and directly querying the database, and it can be done in batches, and it can be done like very efficiently. So this particular use case lends really easily to just a query pattern on top of Postgres.
Yeah, and that's also, I think, been a core, philosophy of the design that we have for Marquez, is really keep things really simple and to don't introduce too many steps to get up and running. And I feel, when we get to the point where I think it's too expensive to just have a Postgres database to handle, I think just querying metadata for jobs and data set and on top of that lineage graph, when we explore it and it's just an exhaustive resource, it's more like a bottleneck, then maybe we transition to a graph database. But initially just keep it simple and focus on using existing infrastructure that's there.
Do you have something in mind, Ryan?
Well, I'm like elbow deep in AWS Neptune right now for a work related project. So this is more out of curiosity because we're sort of dealing with similar issues in terms of diving in and traversal. I totally agree with what you're saying. I didn't expect you to say otherwise. I'm not entirely sure if when we are talking about the lineage graph, is that manifested as a memory mapped object somewhere outside of Postgres, or literally are we querying Postgres directly, building up the lineage graph and then displaying it? That's
it's
currently what's...
so per depth in a breadth first search traversal is 2 queries, one querying the jobs, one querying the data sets. And they can be done in batch, very efficiently. I do have a really strong graph background, and adding Gremlin and doing a Postgres mapping onto Gremlin is something that's definitely on the table in the future. If you're looking for more robust graph-like behavior.
When you say that, and please let me know if I'm derailing this topic, but this is just accurate. Does Postgres support a graph storage engine right now?
No, but you can do the mapping from a Gremlin layer to do graph queries.
Interesting. Okay. Did not know that. That's good to know. That's interesting. No, Julian, I don't have a recommendation for anything. I was kind of curious, what size data sets you're aiming at right now in terms of to support. Is it still at the point where, so at Venmo right now, we have probably on the order of, I don't know, 10,000 MySQL-esque tables, and then call it another 5,000 extant data sets along with it. So this is obviously years off before we were to have something with a full view of it. But is that where does that sort of fall in the range of like what Marquez is aiming at in terms of like the performance of like using the UI and being able to resolve and navigate through the data sets? Is it at that magnitude? Is it one below it? Can you speak to that?
So what I'm targeting for like lineage queries is definitely of that magnitude, more than that magnitude. 10,000 really isn't that large of a number.
10,000 data sets along with something like 10,000-ish jobs, like that's meant, okay.
That's perfectly fine.
Very
I think once
cool.
you start getting in the 100,000s or millions and you have a lot of updates, then it becomes an issue.
I plan on being retired by then, Danny. I'm not going to worry about that. Sorry. All right, this is great. I do have to run. I do apologize for hopping in and asking a bunch of dumb questions and leaving, but thanks everybody.
Thank you. That's great feedback. And I think it's really a goal for Marquez to be easy to deploy as well. So that's kind of part of this.
Okay, cool. I'll just leave you with one thing. I'm swamped right now, but I've always agreed that Marquez has touched on something that's missing. What I'm going to be looking for, hopefully within a year or so when I get some time, is we're digging in really hard in building out our feature store. So my team is talking mostly about features and features groups. Yes, there are data sets with training data sets, but it's really going to be along features and how they came about and like the different jobs that produce this. So hopefully in the course of next year, maybe I can, you might be hearing more from me about that use case in case you're not already thinking about it. But that's definitely where my interests lie these days in terms of using Marquez. Thank you, everybody. This is super helpful.
Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan.